Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Mashing Out with the Beer Fairy on Craft Beer Nation. I'm Ashley Bauer, the Beer Fairy, and I'm here with my friends Alan and Randy. And we're here tonight to talk about fermentation, yeast health, and wort quality. But before we mash in, I just want to mention that you can find us on the blog craftbeernation.org, watch our weekly Hangouts on YouTube, listen to our podcast, Stitcher, iTunes, Podcatcher, and Feedburner. I'll have that there for you to listen to. And join us on G Plus communities on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All right. So last time we met, we talked about fermentation temperature. And I mentioned that, in my opinion, after cleaning and sanitation, fermentation temperature is the biggest thing to make a difference in brewing your beer. But right after that, and not very much below it, is wort quality and yeast health. And those two kind of go hand in hand on fermentation because you've got to have aeration in your wort, you've got to have nutrients in your wort, and you've got to have a nice healthy pitch of yeast to make a good beer. So I guess we'll start with wort quality. Aeration is a good way to go. So right now for me, when I brew my beer, my aeration is the shaking method. And so I'll just pour my beer into the fermenter, close the bucket, shake it around for a bit, and according to multiple sources, that should get it up to between 5 and 8 parts per million, which is kind of where you want to be for the yeast to reproduce. I think, Alan, you use a oxygen stone, right?
Yes. Just with those little like pure, or I don't know how pure, but those red O2 tanks that you get like in the welding section at like Lowe's, Home Depot.
Yeah.
Just use that with the stone and usually put that in for about 60 seconds and just let it run for that time.
That sounds reasonable.
What does the stone itself do?
It kind of just diffuses the air. There's they have a couple different ones that are set to different micron settings. I don't really know the purpose of the smaller one or the larger one over the smaller one, but I think
Because I've seen some. I'm sorry.
Bubbles and surface area, I think, is what it is. The surface area makes a difference.
Okay, that's what I said. What's the difference between sticking an open hose into the wort and turn the oxygen on? Seems like it'd be the same thing to me, but I guess that's a little naive of me.
Yeah, I think the more places that the air or the oxygen comes in contact with liquid is going to get you more oxygenation faster, which
So
is
if
why
you can-
shaking works.
If you can get to the desired level of of oxygen saturation or O2 saturation, like you just said, no, O2 would not be good. Well, yeah, that's O2. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you want.
If you can get to If you can get to the desired level by shaking, why did I look like I was using a shake weight just now? If you can get there by shaking, is using the stone and an oxygen tank isn't. I mean, that seems like it would be a little overkill.
No, it's
or
a little better. I mean, shaking, A, there's the effort, and then B, there's the fact that you do have, just regular air in there. And there's a
Yeah.
small chance that could make your beer get infected. It's unlikely, but it could happen. Whereas
Okay.
with pure oxygen, you've got nice, clean, pure oxygen that you're putting in. So.
and
Because
go ahead.
I use the shake method as well. I mean, I just I don't use a bucket. I just use my carboy, and I stop it up and just kind of rock it really hard back and forth for
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe 45 seconds or so, and let it rip.
Yeah, that's good. I think for most of us doing 5-gallon batches, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's certainly the best way to go when you're just starting out.
Yeah.
Trying to find a chart that I saw before and looking at, but pretty much so there was a experiment, if you will, that was done by just some homebrewers. I can't remember the club or whatnot, but they did like the shake method versus like the what was it, the aquarium tank, and then
Yeah.
versus like the O2, and they did a tasting of all the beers at the end and just like the same recipe or whatever, and they was trying to see which beer which method they thought produced a better beer. And
I
they
think I heard that on Basic Brewing Radio.
quite possibly, I think I heard it on want to say
Or
Brew Network, maybe.
that or Beersmith, I don't know.
I don't know. It's everywhere. Or,
Yeah.
but it seemed like in that experiment they said that the way they preferred was this sitting there shaking it and rocking it.
Yeah,
And
it's really not a bad thing at all.
shaking and rocking equals less equipment too. So
True
Yeah.
enough.
yeah.
So then the other side of this whole wort um, stuff is the nutrients. And most of the time, what beer needs is in the wort from the malt. It's just that's why it works so well. But adding yeast nutrient isn't necessarily a bad thing, and specifically zinc is one that the yeast really like to have in their life. Um,
Adding it to the boiled wort itself or to the boil.
well, you could either do it. Most of the yeast nutrient on the market nowadays you would add with the yeast, but I actually read a thing or listened to again, I can't remember, where with the Ron Hotspot, you had to have those malt yeast. Well, they didn't know about yeast, water, hops. You had to have the purity things, and so Nutria wasn't allowed. And what the people would do back then was they would use chains or plates plated with these metals and put it into the boil, then to kind of cheat that way. So you could do it in the boil, but these days most people do it in the with the yeast.
Yeah.
Cause I have a it's like a little vial. I should have gotten it. I think it's from White Labs.
Mhm.
It's a vial with like a green top, and it's yeast nutrient, and you're supposed to add it in like I think at the last 10 minutes of the boil,
Okay.
and I mean that seems to have worked fine. But um, if you're using a smack pack, that's kind of
Right.
all included, right?
There is some in the smack pack. Yeah, it's more to get the yeast going in the smack pack than it is to get the yeast going.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
do you use a yeast nutrient when you make a starter?
You can, yeah.
That's when I use mine.
Yep.
I like I'll add in with the starter, and I won't add any more else any other time in the brewing process.
Do you do a starter every time, Alan?
The majority of the time. If I don't, I'm usually using like 2 packs of dry yeast. So
I've
Right.
never brewed a dry yeast before.
Dry yeast is pretty fantastic. The important thing is just to rehydrate it. But if you're using dry yeast, if it's 1040 OG or less, 1 pack is fine. If it's over 1040, you would consider using, more, up to 2 packs, 3 packs if you're doing something really high.
And Ashley and I met up at Brewvival, or after Brewvival. Well, we met up at Brewvival, but we hung out after Brewvival. And I was telling her about my cousin who was brewing. He brewed a triple, and he pitched his yeast, and like it went to town. Like 6 hours later, it was churning, and he was so nervous. Like it blew his airlock out and everything. And I was like, well, you're brewing a triple, so you probably should have had a blow off tube.
Right.
But like he was so nervous about it. He was like, man, I don't know what's going on. Like I could hear it in the room and everything. And I'm
That's
like,
a good
that
thing.
just means that you have good healthy yeast that's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yep.
But it was funny. I had to calm him down.
Nice.
And he used dry yeast there, so
mhm.
Right. Yeah, dry yeast is great. I mean, I know back in the day when we all, I guess before we were all brewing, dry yeast was kind of considered not that great, but it's come a long
Yeah.
way. And I've only used liquid yeast once when brewing my bitters because that's the thing I like to brew the most. And I always use a little blue pack of dry yeast and have great success with it.
Before I switched over to using liquid yeast almost exclusively, I used a lot of like pretty much USO5, SO4, and Nottingham
Yeah,
for the majority of my beers.
and they do
But
good.
so do you rehydrate it with like distilled water or something,
Yeah, you
or
could
boiled
use
water?
distilled water or boiled water. Obviously, that's the safest because that way you're not getting the infection or any chance of infection.
What
Um,
do you see as a particular benefit actually, since you use almost exclusively dry yeast? I mean, do you think that there's a benefit to using dry yeast as opposed to liquid yeast? Because it seems the liquid yeast would be easier, seeing that you don't have to rehydrate and you can just shake it up, pop the top, and dump.
Yeah, but there's some amount of planning too. Like you have to build your yeast starter up. So if you're going to brew on Saturday, you have to start getting your yeast starter together several days in advance. Whereas with dry yeast, oh, I'm brewing today. Okay, well, let me get my yeast out. So.
Okay. Well,
With mine, when I do, well, I usually make my starters about at least 12 hours in advance, but I don't usually go past 36. It just depends on, like, if I'm brewing Saturday, do I have time to make it on Thursday, or am I just gonna make it Friday night, brew, and then pitch it from there?
Right.
And the size
yeah.
of it too, because if I'm doing a larger one, I'll still use that same time period, but I'll like chill it down to pour off the majority of the work before I pitch that in.
So we've talked a lot about starters, but with the liquid yeast, you get either the vials or you get the smack packs. And a lot of
Or
times, or the new method
um,
that I haven't ever seen.
I've never seen it either, but I know it's gonna completely replace the only vials being sold right now. No more vials are being made. How about that? The
Okay.
vials that are being sold are the vials that were in inventory, and they're replacing their complete product with this newly propagated product that White Labs has.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very exciting product.
I mean,
I can't say I know more about it than that. I've heard of it,
it's
but
but basically it's the yeast. They grow it like on sheets,
mm,
and somehow they figured out a way to cut off and seal portions of it. So essentially, you're getting the yeast right where it was grown,
mm,
but I need to see it to understand it. I need to see I need to have it in my hand to understand exactly what they're talking about, because it doesn't really make that much sense to me. Like, I'm not putting a sheet of anything in my carboy.
I think
no.
I'm buying the wrong yeast right now because I've ordered a few vial, or just White Labs, and I don't know how much of the stock is they have left, but I'm waiting for, when it comes shipped to me, when I finally get one of those packages instead of a vial.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but so I brew a lot of low ABV stuff, and I've used smack packs without starters, pretty successfully.
Me
I
too.
guess probably the highest ABV thing I've brewed. I might have brewed one that started out at 1080. I don't think I've ever done anything higher than that. But I think that was also, it's about 100,000 yeast cells, and that's also good for 1040 or less. This is a nice safe rule. So
I'm kind of paranoid. I overpitch.
I don't think overpitching. I mean, probably at some point it's a bad thing, but I think it's better to
Yeah.
overpitch than to
Not at our
underpitch.
scale. Yeah.
Remember, we spoke with the guy from Wonderland Brewing,
Mm,
and his advice was like he basically said always overpitch all the time. So I
yeah,
mean, in order for it to impact the flavor, I'm guessing you'd have to overpitch by the tune of gallons.
right. Yeah, don't put a half a gallon of yeast in your 2-gallon batch. Don't-
That'd
It
be interesting.
might be a bad idea.
Yeah. So then there's the vials, and can you even do? I mean, I guess you probably could use them without doing a starter, but
Hmm.
I don't know anybody who does.
You
I
can.
have, yeah, I have before.
Yeah.
I think they come with
Hmm.
approximately the same amount of cells that the smack packs do.
Hmm.
Okay.
But I will admit, I think that I've brewed with the vial maybe once. Most of the time I use a smack pack, and when I brew with the vial, it seems as if there's a little bit more lag if you don't use a starter.
Mm,
There's a little bit of lag in the starting of the fermentation, but once it gets going, well, let me say this: lag in comparison to using a smack pack. But once it gets going, it's all good to go.
right. So
So
I guess we should also explain kind of building a starter and what a starter is, and you guys have probably made more than I have with me and my
that's
low
right.
ABV stuff. So if one of you wants to take the lead on that.
All Allen,
All me.
All Allen right there.
Well, what do you want to get into with it? Just like
Yeah, just
the purpose behind
basically
it?
what it is. If you've never seen one before, what would we be
Well,
looking
essentially what
at?
it is you're just making a small batch of beer, Most people will do like a 1 liter starter as kind of like a base for anything they do with the liquid yeast. But you're just making a small batch of beer, not necessarily to like have it ferment out and drink it. You're just trying to have the yeast cells like awaken, multiply, and pretty much get ready for the fermentation that you're about to like the batch you're about to ferment anyway. Um, and yeah.
You got
So
the flask, right?
Yes,
Golden
I actually
flask.
have my 2 liter one right here.
Yeah.
Kind of fancy. Just
So generally people have that. If you don't have that, I guess some other glass container would be fine.
hmm. I've used like those gallon jugs that people they'll like make meads or ciders or whatever in.
yeah,
I've used
the
those
glass
before.
carp, the 1 gallon clear glass jug.
Yeah.
I've
hmm
used that too. Yeah.
And
I
then
think
there's usually a stir plate involved, right?
yes, I use a stir plate.
You don't have to have a stir plate
You don't
though.
have to.
It's just better. It gets more oxygen into the beer, which
Yeah.
is making your yeast grow a lot faster.
And it keeps the yeast constantly in suspension rather than like they'll naturally settle out after so long. Just I mean not even like that long. But so what they suggest if you are not using a stir plate is like if you just place it in the kitchen every time you pass it to pick it up and swirl it around,
Right.
kind of keep it oxygenated a little bit and keep the yeast cells in suspension, so that they have a better opportunity to grow and such.
Yeah.
So not using a starter is the equivalent of like if you ever go to a football game and you see the specialty players come out or the skill position players come out and they warm up and then the rest of the team comes out and they warm up and then right before they come out in the field they're all like, we about to do this, yeah, we about to do this, yeah, and then they run on the field and then they start playing. Well, all that is not using a starter. Using a starter is like you pour the yeast in and it's already like 3 minutes into the first quarter. So
Okay.
the yeast like hit the ground running wide open, and your fermentation gets going faster.
That's a fantastic analogy.
We about to do this. What?
Yeah, because when you don't use a starter, the yeast have to start multiplying, working very hard. They can't actually start fermenting your beer. I mean, they are in a way, but they're also working really hard just to grow themselves up.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So they'll do the same thing too, like after you pitch a starter into it, but they won't have so much. They won't have as long as the time as it would if you didn't. So like they refer to sometimes as lag time, so that'll be a lot
Right.
shorter. Like I
Yeah,
usually get
longer
mine
lag time
going
is
in
dangerous for your
6-ish
beer.
hours or so. But
Because if you have a
What'd you
big
say,
lag
Ash?
time, it's dangerous for your beer because then the yeast haven't taken over enough to outpopulate any sort of bacteria or infection you might have gotten.
yeah,
And
that's
the fact that you just oxygenated your beer pretty good. You got some fuel in there for it for infection.
Yep.
So
mhm,
you kind of want the yeast to destroy that oxygen as soon as it possibly can, or start
And
consume the oxygen.
stressed yeast are also going to produce off flavors. So if you have stressed yeast because they didn't have nearly enough time to grow themselves, then you're going to have off
mhm.
flavors in your beer just like you would with the
But
temperature of
if you
things.
if you're gonna be making a lagered beer, you have to make like a really big starter, right? Because you need well, the lagering process requires a lot more yeast cells, right?
Yeah,
So I like to imagine you have to use a bigger starter, or maybe, um, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Is that right?
I would imagine. I haven't ever brewed a lager.
Yeah, some say you need 4 times as many cells when you're doing a lager versus doing an
Jeez,
ale. So that
Sounds
could
reasonable.
that could be quite a bit, and
that's a lot.
yeah. So like I think too, like if I was gonna do it, like I did a Kolsch not that long ago, I'm gonna do some other thing soon, which is semi lager, but you know what I mean. But still make the huge starter, but then I usually chill off or like let it chill out in the fridge for a while and decant the spent wort out off of that, so I pretty much get only the yeast cells in there.
The lagered version of a Kolsch is a common or a cream ale, maybe.
No, lager starts out with L yeast, and then it's lagered. I mean, lager starts out. Kolsch starts out L yeast, and then you ferment about 60 degrees, and then you lager it after it's fermented.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the temps that the Kolsch yeast like work at.
Right. So you're talking about the California common that uses lager yeast at L temperatures?
Yeah, yeah. Cause my dad is a lager drinker. He's a old Milwaukee kind of guy, and I'm not set up to make lagers.
No.
And I wanted to make a beer that he drink, and the closest I can think of is like a cream ale,
A cream ale,
because
a
like,
blonde, or a Kolsch, that's what I'd usually recommend.
okay, well, I don't have anything to cool it down to lagering temperatures, which you said is needed for a Kolsch, right?
Yeah, I use my kegerator, honestly.
Oh, good
Because
idea.
you're doing the majority of the fermentation at the L temperature. The lagering part's more just to clear it out and make it
So
clean.
it's like cold crashing it basically.
Yeah, because Kolsch yeast, the L yeast they use for that, is not at all highly flocculent, meaning
Okay.
it hangs out in suspension like crazy on its own. And so lagering it makes it flack out and be nice and clear and crisp.
Cool. Hmm. Duly noted.
Yeah. But a blonde ale or a cream ale would also be a good option if you like Old Milwaukee.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he does.
My dad likes
Just
Miller Lite. Don't feel bad.
like just up the hopping a little, not necessarily to bitterness. To start with like adding a little more hop flavor into it when you give it to them, and just a little bit more, and just creep it in there. It's
I
like,
know.
here's another batch of that. There you go.
How can we be such craft beer advocates and we can't convince our own parents to drink craft beer? My dad will try anything I drink, but anyway, I digress.
Yeah, my dad will too. My mom actually likes some of the craft beers. She actually really likes sours. It's pretty cool. So, fermentation. Last time, again, we did temperature. This time it's the wort quality and the yeast health. Do any of you guys have questions or
Mm,
thoughts?
should we should we mention like the step right before you put your before you rack your beer to primary, which is um well, during the wort collection process, I had this problem. I was brewing a big stout, and my I had a stuck sparge,
Mm,
and I got mad nervous because I was like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then I texted Alan, I think, and I was like, what do I do? And then I was like, he's taking too long. So I like started like sticking my thermometer like inside the valve. I started sticking my thermometer inside the valve, and then I ended up like stirring up my mash and everything,
yeah,
and and it got unstuck. So
yeah.
just thought it'd be worth mentioning, because if you get a stuck sparge, don't panic like I did.
No, there's no
Just try
reason to
to,
freak out.
yeah.
I did a whole sparge, or I did a whole mash, and then as soon as I was about to start draining it out, I looked down and realized I forgot to put my false bottom into my mash tun.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm like, well, this is gonna end poorly.
What did you do?
I just transferred everything over to my a kettle that I had, and then I put it in, and then I transferred it all back. Not the best thing in the world, but you do what you gotta do.
Oh man,
It was fun.
it's a learning. I bet you've never forgotten that false bottom again.
No, no. Everybody makes mistakes, so
Yeah. Remember, anything that touches that wort after boil needs to be sanitized.
yeah.
I think that's worth mentioning, including if you use a strainer, that when you're going from your kettle into your carboy, make sure your strainer is sanitized, because if not, all that effort could end up being in vain, or
Yeah,
it could end up. There's a small likelihood you end up with a fantastic sour beer, but probably not.
Unlikely.
so you definitely want
Yeah.
to keep it as clean as you can, and make sure you get the yeast in before the because there's gonna be bacteria in your beer, but you just want to get the yeast in so they could take over and control the area before the bacteria does.
Right. So we
And
touched on cleaning and sanitation previously. Like I said, I thought that was the number one thing you can do. And then I thought temperature was the number two thing. And then I thought this was the number three thing. So what do you guys think is the number four thing?
well, I mean, I think, I mean, we're going through a progression here. So um, I think we need to talk about maybe primary fermentation and racking, and secondary fermentation and dry hopping, or additional ingredients, or what additional ingredients to add when, because some people may say, if you're gonna have chocolate in your beer, you can add it in the boil. Well, some people may say, add cocoa nibs in your secondary. Or so, I mean, I think we can kind of expound on the whole litany of ingredients that can be added to beer, and when's the proper time to add them, and
Yeah.
also, yeah, I think that could be a good thing. Dry hopping, all that stuff.
Maybe just do recipe formulation next.
Yeah,
I mean, certainly you can use a kit, which is a great way to get a fairly decent recipe without
for
having to
sure.
think about it. But maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to come up with your own recipe, and what's the best way to do that?
Well, if you get a kit and you modify it, it's your recipe. That's what I say.
I'll let you know how I got into it next show because that'll be. It could be
Yeah.
a long story.
And we've been using a lot of terms that the some people new to homebrewing may not know. So at some point, and we'll make this announcement, but it might be a good idea. We'll probably create a homebrew glossary and post it up on craftbeernation.org,
Yeah.
so that people who may be watching this for the first time, they'll be like, "Stuck sparge, what is that?"
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah, I would have had no idea what that was when I first got started. It was basically me
So
yeah,
seeing it in person to understand what that is.
a
yeah.
short, funny story from my very first batch of beer before I brewed. Because I started out all grain. I, you know, ordered online from the homebrew shop, and I had no idea, like literally anything. So I ordered a kit of it was all grain kit, one that was cracked or where the grain was crushed, and one where it wasn't. I think it was called cracked, and I was just wondering, like, oh, I wonder the difference between how these two batches of beer will come out.
So crushing your grain may be one of the most important things in brewing.
Well, let's just say five and a quarter years ago, Alan Huerta had no idea what he was doing, and just it's like, let's see what happens.
It was real weak, huh?
Well, I had to sit. I didn't have a rolling pin or anything, so I had to use like a little Ziploc, like a gallon Ziploc bag, put a little bit of grain in, and use a glass, rolling it back and forth, trying to crush my grain.
Oh, I
Yeah.
thought you were saying you ended up not crushing it. You just brewed with
Oh
the grain. And so
no,
what
I,
happened?
I
Like
found
the
out
first.
before brew day, but
I was about to say you made the first session beer.
So maybe instead of recipe formulation, next time we talk process,
Yeah,
like
must be good.
just the brewing process, both for extract and all grain.
yeah,
Just
that's a good
what
idea.
Actually,
what
that
you
might work
do.
out too with. Oh, actually, Big Brew Day is in
May.
May. I was gonna say, but April's the next show.
Well, shoot.
Well, I guess it's before, so they have time to get ready for the Big Brew Day. Let's put it
That's
that way.
true. Yeah. Yeah. Big Brew Day Eve, a month in advance. I like it. All right.
Cool.
Well, then, unless anybody has anything else to add, I guess we can mash out.
I'm good.
All right. Well, it's been fun, and thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. Reminder to everyone that you can check our blog out, craftbeernation.org, watch our weekly YouTube podcast, or listen on Stitcher, iTunes, Podcatcher, Feedburner. Join us in our Google Plus community on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next month.
Follow us on